Um, it's very tempting to say hello to everybody individually. It's wonderful to see you, even if it's not in person. My name is Galia Golan. I'm one of the organizers of our Learning Peace series from Combatants for Peace. And as I think most of you probably know, Combatants for Peace was founded in 2006 as a joint Israeli and Palestinian peace movement. Totally joint, Israelis and Palestinians, most of whom were combatants in the past, former fighters on both sides of the conflict, who decided to work together to promote non-violent opposition to the occupation and to fight together non-violently for a solution to the conflict. Tonight's or today's session will be in English because of our distinguished guests. And of course, it's on Zoom because of COVID. It will be recorded, at least the speakers will be recorded. What I'd like to ask everybody to do now is to mute yourselves if you're not already muted, but also please send your questions to the chat box. There's a little chat symbol down at the bottom of your screen. So if you have any questions you want to raise when we get to the question and answer session, please send them to the chat box. So today, the idea is to examine the role of the international community, specifically as represented by foreign diplomats in Jerusalem and Ramallah. What we want to try to do is to better understand what foreign diplomats can or perhaps cannot do to help us, to strengthen us, the peace activists in Israel and in Palestine. Over the years, the EU has given millions to help and protect Palestinians living under occupation. In addition to statements and decisions, the EU has sent millions in aid and equipment to the West Bank and Gaza. But quite often, as I think we all know, their projects and equipment have been destroyed by Israeli actions. So we were shocked some years ago to learn about this situation. As an example, in Susia, which is in the Hebron Hills. In Susia, people were living, the local population, were living in caves, and they were subject to repeated harassment and demolitions. And the Israeli army actually came in and destroyed the generators that had been provided by European donors. It was shocking when we first read about it, but it was not a one-time event. Even now, with the pandemic raging, the occupation continues. And in fact, destruction, evictions, demolitions have actually increased in the past, in the West Bank, the Jordan Rift Valley, Homsa, East Jerusalem. Demolitions and evictions have actually increased over recent weeks and months. There's been, in fact, a 22% increase compared to 2019. In 2020, there's been a 22% increase in the destruction of donor-provided structures in the West Bank. However, and that's what we want to talk about a little bit more tonight, is that despite this, European diplomats have also played a very, very positive role. We have numerous examples of this. If we go back to years ago, various Israeli peace movements tried to prevent settlement expansion. For example, the case of Ras al-Amud in East Jerusalem, where there were eviction orders and demolition orders, and the idea by Israel was to set up a new settlement on land that belonged to local Palestinians in East Jerusalem. But as a result of visits by European diplomats, the project of Ras al-Amud, the settlement, was delayed. Sometimes delay is about all we can hope for. But because the European diplomats paid a visit, expressed interest, Israel decided to postpone, at least for a while, the building of this settlement. In Combatants for Peace, we experienced this ourselves in the case of Khan al-Ahmar. In Khan al-Ahmar in 2018 and 2019, the Israeli government sought to evacuate and demolish this Palestinian community. It's hard to call it even a village. It's basically a Bedouin encampment of people who've been moved many times by Israel. And the government decided to close it down, evacuate it, and build a settlement instead. This is basically, as I said, can hardly be called a village. Khan al-Ahmar was really a cluster of Bedouin tents. The only permanent structure there that they had built was a school that they had built for themselves and for the children in the region. So in 2018, 2019, Combatants for Peace spent days and nights there. We staged a constant vigil in order to bring attention and hopefully prevent the demolition. In time, a group of European diplomats visited, and the Israeli government hesitated. So to this day, Khan al-Ahmar is still standing. The tents are still there, and the demolition has not yet taken place. We don't know if it's going to happen in the future, but I think this was a major achievement and a wonderful example of the positive impact diplomats can have in conjunction with Israeli and Palestinian peace activists. More recently, after a visit in December by European diplomats to Silwan in East Jerusalem, and after a march just a few days ago by Combatants for Peace and Peace Now, where we protested still more demolitions in Silwan, the EU issued a condemnation of intended Israeli actions there. We're hopeful that this time too, attention from diplomats will stay the hand of the Israeli government. That's our hope. So we are honored and very grateful to have with us today to discuss the role of diplomats, what they can or cannot do. We're really very grateful to have two distinguished speakers, the head of the EU delegation to the West Bank and Gaza Strip, Sven Kühn von Burgsdorff, I can barely pronounce that, so excuse my pronunciation, and also the representative of Switzerland to Ramallah, Viktor Vavricka. Following, just to lay out the evening, following their comments, we will have a short panel of Combatants for Peace, peace activists, who are out there, mainly in the Jordan Valley, almost every day, trying to protect local Palestinians and prevent harassment, and worse, of course, by settlers and the army. So we'll hear from some of the activists, Kochav Shachar, Yair, Bunzel, and Osama Iliwat. So after this panel of activists, we'll open the floor to questions, but be sure to send your questions to the chat box and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So what I'd like to ask you to do now, I think everybody is on, more or less. Please be sure to mute your microphones and be sure to send your questions to the chat box down at the bottom of the screen. So I would like to invite our distinguished speakers, Mr. Sven Kühn von Burgsdorff and Mr. Viktor Vavricka, to speak. And I think we'll start with, well, whoever would like to start, but I really do want to thank you once again for agreeing to appear. We greatly appreciate not only the fact that you've agreed to speak for us, but also for your work over the years, in fact. So let me give the floor to Mr. Sven or Mr. Viktor, whoever would like to begin.
Yeah, thank you, Galia. We haven't coordinated, Viktor and I, who is speaking first, but following the chronology of your pronunciations, I suggest I take the baton and continue with your due permission. And Viktor, sorry for jumping the gun.
That's
now,
okay.
Galia, you know, as diplomats, actually, we shouldn't be here. we shouldn't be on a live stream with Facebook. We should insist on having Chatham House rules applied. And of course we don't. Of course we don't. As a result of which we have to stick to diplomatic protocol. And allow me to just repeat what the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations stipulates, and that gives you already some clear idea on what we can do and what we cannot. And I'm sure that Viktor can complement that. I'm going to read to you Article 3. It might be boring for human rights activists, but it's the bread and butter of diplomats. I'm afraid I have to repeat this here. The functions of a diplomatic mission consist inter alia, and I say inter alia, in representing the sending state in the receiving state. B, protecting the receiving state interests of the sending state and of its nationals within the limits permitted by international law. C, negotiating with the government of the receiving state. D, ascertaining by all lawful means conditions and developments in the receiving state and reporting thereon to the government of the sending state. And E, finally, promoting friendly relations between the sending state and the receiving state and developing their economic, cultural, and scientific relations. So this is basically the framework. And I said inter alia, which means it's not exclusive. It can also comprise other elements. And then there's a very important stipulation, Article 41A1, which is that diplomats cannot interfere in internal affairs of the receiving state. That's very important. Now, this is a very broad article, and as a result of which many people have already been sent persona non grata because of a very discretionary interpretation of what is intervention in internal affairs of the receiving state. Now, I can only say the following. If you look at the preamble of this diplomatic convention of Vienna in 1961, and you look in particular at Article 3.1d, ascertaining by all lawful means conditions and developments in the receiving state and reporting thereon to the government of the sending state, you have pretty much a wide coverage of what the diplomat can do. I just allow me to draw your attention to the recent declaration of persona non grata of 3 European diplomats by Russia, because of my 3 colleagues from Sweden, I think Germany, and I don't know, Austria, I think, Poland exactly have observed a public protest against the government and in support of Mr. Navalny. Now, this expulsion, according to the European Union interpretation of the events, was clearly in contravention of what the articles to which I just referred to, because indeed these 3 colleagues of ours have actually, observed a event which took place in a situation which they need to report on to their respective governments. I have been in my previous missions, and I have been already 4 times head of mission for the European Union, including Cuba, which is a pretty tight run spot in terms of what diplomats can do or not. I have participated in numerous events, attending court hearings, visiting human rights activists, doing visits to project sites where we felt we need to be present. And I never have been declared persona non grata, but it is absolutely a matter of discretion of the government where you are hosted to make it a political event or not. So in a nutshell, you're really walking a tightrope as a diplomat if you are posted in a situation where the government you are accredited to does not want you to report on developments which they consider contrary to their interests and which they see as hostile to their objectives in that respective government or respective society. Now, here I have, of course, an advantage, and Victor as well. We are accredited to the Palestinian Authority. We are not accredited to the State of Israel, but we are here with the consent of Israel. I have a diplomatic white card, I have diplomatic coverage and immunity granted by the State of Israel, but my official function is with the Palestinian Authority. So I'm not quite sure whether I can be kicked out by Israel. They can certainly refuse to extend my visa of stay here and take away my immunities, but the receiving state is the Palestinian Authority. As you know, the EU does not recognize Palestine as an independent state, contrary to 138 countries. We still consider this to be a project in the making, but I'm officially accredited to the Palestinian Authority. And in that context, I have to submit my letters of credence to President Abbas in his capacity as president of the Palestinian Authority. So in a nutshell, we as diplomats have to live within the confinements of the Vienna Convention. There is a large room of maneuver, and the application thereof depends very much, A, on the mandate you as a diplomat have received by your sending state, in this case, for me, the European Union, and B, the interpretation of your activities by the receiving state. And there is no clear-cut rule. It very much depends, and that I may want to, many possibly end with that, on your personality as well, how much risk you are going to take, how much your own sending government or institution is willing to do for you, and how much acceptance and tolerance the receiving state grants you. So this is a bit sort of the very undefined, in a way, environment within which we have to operate. But I'm happy to respond to questions on this one. I'd like to suggest that Victor takes the floor now.
Okay, Victor, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Galia, and all participants. Thank you, Sven, for laying the ground for me to speak. Thanks for the opportunity, first of all, for this exchange. So my name is Viktor Vavricka. I'm the head of mission in Ramallah for Switzerland. And I've been here since May 2020, so in the midst of the pandemic. But I'm not completely new to this context. I started actually my professional career as an ICRC delegate 20 years ago here in the OPT. It was just shortly before the second Intifada. And I also returned as an EU election, a Swiss EU election observer for the 2006 PLC elections here in Palestine. So I've always kept an interest in the region, also during my posting in Riyadh. Sven mentioned it, so I will also, given the fact that we're not in a completely closed setting, I will rather speak in a personal capacity. And I had the same reflex, what can diplomats do in a context that is so highly politicized like the one in Israel and Palestine. The first thing for me is the realization of a simple fact, and that's that the diplomats don't have the authority to, or don't have the tools to prevent violations of human rights and international humanitarian law, given the Vienna Convention, given the fact that the international community has not given those tools in the hands of diplomats. We don't have any policing or law enforcement authority when we're active in a host state. But also this applies in more general terms to the fact that international law enforcement mechanisms are only as good as the international consensus allows for such mechanisms. And we're all aware that in the case of human rights, IHL violations, we have to rely on the imperfect mechanism of the UN Security Council. So all in all, for diplomats, posting in the OPT tends to be rather frustrating things, given what is happening on the ground, especially on a longer term perspective. Because of the lack of effects of your work that you see immediately unfolding. So for me personally, my first strategy as a diplomat here, posted in the OPT, is certainly trying to keep my own psychological resilience at a high level. So basically what I do when I get up in the morning, I look in the mirror and I say, this is not my conflict. So this is the first survival strategy. But still, there is a number of things we can do. I can outline just a few points that came to my mind. I'm sure Sven can also complement those if something else comes into his mind. And you, Galia, referred to it, you know, the Khan al-Ahmar case, which was a good example of how the actual presence on the ground of diplomats, you know, in the different field visits that take place, that they actually can make a difference, you know, by exerting diplomatic pressure on the authorities that are in charge. So yeah, the presence on the ground, first thing for me to take away, is absolutely crucial and can yield to effects. Then another point is the realization that our country's foreign policy is not driven by us diplomats in the field, basically. The foreign policy is developed back in capital. So very important in our job is to do the right amount of reporting back to capital, also very crucial. The reporting then leads to standing positions of your governments, and also the standing positions, especially with regard to the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts. The reference to the international parameters are key, and these standing positions need to be communicated, you know, via the statements that you also refer to, but also other means. You know, there is government strategies, like we have a MENA strategy, where again this traditional position on this conflict is being reflected, but also communicated through other channels like the multilateral platforms, but also in the relevant bilateral discussions. So yeah, the importance to have that standing position and to communicate it, because we are all aware that it's state positions and practice that forms customary international law. So it is important to have a position and to maintain this. And yeah, it can be a challenge. I guess some of the countries face shifting domestic policy priorities or perceptions, and you have to deal with that. And it's our role, the diplomats in the field, to keep those positions active. Also, we need to recall common Article 3 of the Geneva Convention, which obliges all states to respect and to ensure respect IHL. And in that sense, for Switzerland in particular, because Switzerland is the depository state of the Geneva Conventions, we consider the aspect of ensuring respect of IHL as really part of our foreign policy DNA, which makes us very proactive in the field of IHL. Supporting the civil society organizations is key for us. You know, as I mentioned, we don't have the tools and the means to fight in courts or to be active in the legal system ourselves. It's not part of our mandate while we're here. So we engage with the civil society organizations that are indispensable in doing all the necessary legal legwork in the advocacy and in the legal cases in the courts to advance the search for the right interpretation of what is happening on the ground, which is obviously extremely complex, given, I mean, when you look at the OPT, the overlapping sets of legal frameworks, you know, starting from the Ottoman period and then the British mandate and military law and civilian law, so Jordanian law, it's just impossible to deal with that ourselves. And here we rely very strongly on supporting the civil society organizations that have the knowledge and the tools to defend those cases. Another point, and then I'm slowly coming to the end of my list, is yeah, the whole concept of transitional justice. Obviously, you may all be aware of the Joannet principles and the need for four elements, you know, to be sort of an interlocking mechanism to make transitional justice come true: the right to truth, the right to justice, the right to reparation, and the right to non-recurrence. So Switzerland has always been a strong advocate for this concept of transitional justice, and yes, providing courses and trainings in that field as well. And yeah, the recent decision by the International Criminal Court is certainly something that that strengthens the international rule of law and in international criminal jurisprudence, and in that sense, it's certainly something that gives hope for strengthening also the whole concept of transitional justice in the OPT context. And one very last point I would like to mention, where we can become active more, even more so in this context, is to engage with religious actors. The international community, the UN system tends to sideline, you know, religious sensibilities somewhat. So we're engaged in a religion and conflict program together with the Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, which has a strong program on religion and conflict. So also in that front, we provide trainings, because we believe, I mean, especially if you look at the settlement enterprise, sooner or later we'll all have to take into account some of the religious and biblical raison d'être that is always being put forward. So nobody said it was going to be easy. It starts with oneself, being a diplomat here, but all in all, I was just giving some loose, not recommendations, observations from my side on what we can do and what we cannot do. And I'm open for any questions and discussions. But thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Viktor and Sven. Actually, I think you laid out for us, both of you, pretty much the guidelines of what you can or cannot do. I think even appearing in this meeting tonight is perhaps stretching the boundaries a little bit by working with civil society, in this case, Combatants for Peace. But as you know, we greatly appreciate this. Before we go to the questions, and I think we have quite a few questions, but I also wanted to bring a voice from the field, and that's why we have three of our really super active activists from Combatants for Peace who are out there mainly in the Jordan Rift Valley almost every day and have been for a long time. I don't know if this is an area that as diplomats you can go to or you choose to go to, or what you can do in conjunction with the peace activists who are out there. But I think it's extremely important, and maybe in this way we can try to engage you, to hear from Yair Bunzel and Kochav Shachar and Osama Iliwat, three of our, as I say, central activists who are out there all the time, protecting local Palestinian shepherds, trying to protect people from settler violence, from the army. And while we try to, together with other organizations, we try to delay, if not eliminate, the threat of land expropriation and demolitions and so forth. I don't want to say it's a losing battle. We're out there and we will continue to be out there, but I want to ask Yair and Osama and Kochav to give us a bit of a taste of what it's like there every day and what's been going on. So whoever wants to begin, the floor is yours. Yair, Kochav,
Thank
Osama.
you, Gary. Thank you, Gary. Nice to see you again. Thank you for organizing this, and I miss you. Thank you everyone for speaking. My name is Osama, and unfortunately, I'm not the kind or cool person in Combatants for Peace. I like to tell people what they have to hear and not what they want to hear. So sorry for that. I'm not diplomat. I can't make my words very beautiful sometimes because I don't want people to hear it. I am living this. It is my conflict, Mr. Victor. It is your conflict as a human being. I was very disappointed when you said this is not my conflict. We are all human beings. When other human beings are occupied for 50 years, it is all of us conflict to protect these people. Thank you so much. All what we're asking for in 50 years, you are talking about the international law, the international law, the international law. I heard it more than one time. I did not see the international law working here. When a country occupying another country for more than 50 years, breaking all the international laws, I don't feel there is international law here. I feel the international law is not working in Israel, and it's above the international law. All what we asking is enough water. All what we asking is stop demolishing our houses in Jordan Valley and here and there. This is not a big thing to ask from the humanity, to ask from the international people, from you, the diplomats. I don't want you to give me a fish every day and to give me a caravan that Israel can destroy it, or to give me a tank of water. I'm not blaming anyone, guys. I'm talking in general. I don't want anyone to give me a fish every day to eat. I want to be free, to be allowed to go to the sea and do fishing by myself. I want the boat. Everyone is asking us to stop violence, and we did. Everyone was asking us to accept Oslo, and we did. We are accepting everything just to live. We don't have water, guys. Our houses get demolished every single day. Jordan Valley, today they demolished 3 pools. People collect water during winter just to use it in their farms in the summer, and Israel is destroying it. There is a lot of international laws, 242, 338. It was in the international community since ages. It's not happening. To be honest, I love Europe. I am very, very, very disappointed of the international law and the people who are representing the international law. And I don't feel any change. You were all of you, all of the international people were in Homsa, and you have seen kids are living under the rain, under the sun, under this, under that. I know you are doing your best. I know as people, as a human beings, you don't agree with this, and you are following policy of your country. I know this, but I'm saying here, as a Palestinian, saying it from here, we are part of the international community. We are human beings. We want your support as a human being. We don't want you to forget that you are a human because you have rules to deal with. We are facing ethnic cleansing in our land, in Area C. We accepted the peace. You all know that we accepted the peace and we didn't reach the peace. My only dream is to go back to visit my grandmother in Jerusalem, which is 25 minutes away from me, where I was expelled from there, and I can't. My only dream is to take my kids to the beach, and I can't. No one deserves to live this life in this world. Yeah, the international community sent airplanes to loop when the dictator Gaddafi does something to people. But when it's about Israel, unfortunately, nothing happening. That's what all I have to say for now. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Yes, Osama definitely says what's on his mind, but without meaning anything personally, it is certainly, I think, an expression of the frustration that we feel here, especially the point about international action in other conflicts. And our feeling here is that there is no accountability. We know, we're very familiar with the Geneva Conventions and the decisions of the United Nations. We can recite them by heart. I teach them. But we do definitely have the feeling, and it is frustration, whether Israeli or Palestinian, that that the international community, as distinct, by the way, from you diplomats yourselves, that the international community in general does not hold Israel accountable. And by the way, I really must say that that's one of the reasons that we are particularly grateful and appreciative of the kind of actions that diplomats yourselves here in our area have done, and things like Khan al-Akmar and Ras al-Amud and other places. I think that what we feel is the frustration, but we certainly appreciate your limits and the limitations, but also what you have been able to do. Let's move on. Kochav and Yair, can you give us some more about what has been going on the ground, particularly in the Jordan Valley over recent weeks? It's not very pleasant, but it's nice to hear more about it.
Sure. Yair, would you like to go first, or?
No, I will give you the
floor.
Okay, you will be Acharon Chaviv. So good evening for all. I'm Kochav Shachar. I'm 23 years old from Tel Aviv. I'm a human rights activist, anti-apartheid activist. I want to hold for a second. I heard the word conflict many times, and let me hold on that. This is not just a conflict between the state of Israel and the state of Palestine. This is an oppression to a whole nation. Okay, this is a violation of human rights. It's not just a conflict. The situation is escalating every day. And for me personally, as a privileged activist that in the end of the day can go back from Jordan Valley, put it all behind me and go back to my apartment in Tel Aviv, I'm telling you, it's hard for me. And I'm the most privileged in this situation. They live under this situation on a daily basis. They experiment the settler violence, the occupation violence on a daily basis. And yes, the occupation is violent. There is no cute occupation. There is no nice occupation or moral occupation. Occupation is violent for itself. So it's beyond just a conflict, and it's for the past 2 weeks, I think that almost every day or every 2 days, there were more and more demolitions in the sea areas. If it's Jordan Valley mostly, and also South Hebron Hills. The situation is escalating, and Palestinians deserve water. They deserve to feel secure. They deserve to have access to clean water, and they need the feeling of some secure and privacy, but they don't have it. They simply don't. And I'm not even talking about Gaza, for example. We are just focusing in Jordan Valley. We see demolitions on a daily basis. We see families that they're demolishing their houses, and then they also confiscate their property. They're taking their cars, they're taking their property, and then they cannot even rebuild. Yeah, people can live in the same place for hundreds of years, and the Israeli state will announce them as Galia Polshim,
as invaders, as if
Yes.
they had invaded after
invaders in their own
generations.
land.
Yeah.
And the law for itself is racist. This is exactly how ethnic cleansing looks like. This is exactly it. And we know our community, the activist community, we know that this is all a part of just in order to clean Area C from Palestinians, to make it an area only for Jewish people. We see it in Area C in the most strong way as we see it in East Jerusalem and other areas. And this has to stop. This just have to stop. I sometimes I'm wondering how much more will it escalate in order to the war to react. Now, I really thank for every diplomat and every politician that step a foot and come to the field. We want to see it more. It will be amazing. But We need to spread this. We need to show what's happening here to everyone in order that they might change their mind and put some pressure on their government in order to end it. Because what's happening here, it's against humanity. And history will judge us. It will judge us all if we act against it or we didn't. As history judged us for not involving enough in Holocaust or stuff like that, my whole family is a Holocaust survivor from all the sides, or if they're not survivors, they're all dead. So history will judge us for if we're acting for the freedom of the Palestinian nation or not. And the most important thing is to end it as soon as possible and to make sure that people get the basic human rights that they deserve as humans. And I think that in general, we have to start using our privileges more in order to help Palestinians.
Thank you. Thank you so much,
I can
Kochav.
go there and use my privilege. And I'm talking with, what?
No, I just wanted to add here that we don't ask the diplomatic corps to act instead of us. And I think from what Kochav has just said, I think it's clear from what Kochav just said is that what we are doing what we can, and what we seek from the diplomatic community is in fact the types of things that you've already done in the past, and that is bringing what is happening, bringing the facts to the public, to your governments. Because as I tried to point out, when you act, the Israeli government is a little bit more willing to listen, or at least to be more cautious. And this is one of the reasons that we turn to you, the same way that we turn to our courts and other institutions. We know you can't do it for us. We're not asking you to do it for us, but we do very much appreciate this.
It was not what I meant. I'm not talking.
No. I'm just
talking. Yes, I'm talking in general for whoever is listening right now to help us end it, to expose more people to the reality here. Yesterday,
Absolutely.
a father of a very good friend of mine was kidnapped. We have no idea where he is. He was taken. We have no idea where he is. We don't get any information about him. Where do they hold him? This stuff, just cannot happen. And when I'm saying that I would like to see more people in the field and I would like to use privilege, I speak as for example, when I'm working to escort Palestinian shepherds, they have nobody, literally nobody, except human rights activists or peace activists that defends them from settler violence. They cannot call the Palestinian police because they're not allowed to come to Area C, and don't let. Of course, they will not call the army because they simply don't care. The army and the settlers over the Jordan Valley is one unit. I can tell you on and on about the cases that I saw with my eyes. Yeah, some soldiers coming in order to deportate Palestinian shepherds, not calling their commander to ask questions, calling a settler to ask if they're done. Are we over? Was there anything else? Other people you wanted us to take care of? This is not making any sense, and I feel like I'm coming there in order to make sure that nothing illegal is happening. It doesn't make any sense. It's insane. I'm not supposed to go there, and the law should be forced, and it's not forced. And when people deportate people, when soldiers deportate people, in addition to the settlers that deportate them illegally from places that they're supposed to go, I'm sorry. I'm very excited at the moment, but I think it's after very bad 2 weeks of demolitions and just stealing property of people and leaving them just like that, in the middle of absolutely nowhere, after also taking their cars, yeah, with no accessibility to water or electricity. When we're talking about babies involved, you know how young was the first, this year in November 5th, there was the first demolition in Khonsa Afoka in the north of the Jordan Valley. You know how young was the youngest boy among the 74 people from within 41 minors? The youngest was 2 days old. 2 days old baby. And the demolitions that happened last week, this baby is supposed to be 2.5 months old, something like that. The demolitions that happened this week, so he's almost 3 months old. This is still so sensitive, and we're talking about rain and floods. There is no program, there is no nothing. They demolish, take their stuff, and leave them like that. You can believe it, you cannot believe me, you can go and check me, you can come to the field and see it yourself, but we must stop it. And it's our job to stop it. We are privileged enough and we are aware, so we must act against it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kochav. Yair, could you add a bit more? Yair has been involved with the Northern group that's been out there day in and day out for months, maybe even years. And I don't think there's anyone who knows the Jordan Valley or Area C more than Yair. So what can you tell us?
Well, I think you get the emotions from Kochav, and you get the emotions from Osama. I can't add to that because I think this is the reality. This is what we experience. This is mostly what the Palestinians experience on a daily basis. And the last 2 weeks have been really an extreme example of, you always say, okay, tomorrow is going to be a better day. You hope for the sun to shine and it's going to be better. And the next day is worse. The only thing that keeps me optimist and gives me the energy to continue and go again and give the little support to the Palestinians who try to rebuild their homes, whether it's Homsa or the other places, is if I see those Palestinians who refuse to give up, they can pack their things and move to the town not far from there. And this is exactly what the Israeli government wants them to do. It wants Area C, as you've heard several times, to be as empty as possible from Palestinians, and they encourage them to give their way of life that has been their way of life for generations and move to the towns and to the cities and make Area C just with the, by the way, relatively small number of Jewish Israeli settlers. But if they hold to their ground and they keep their way of life that like they were doing for generations, I just don't think, I'm very privileged, as Kochav said, but I don't think I have the privilege to give up. As a human being, as an Israeli, as a Jew. Kochav mentioned the Holocaust. Myself, I'm also born to people who survived, both father and mother survived the Holocaust in Budapest, Hungary. And this is something that I refuse to separate from my responsibility as a human being. I saw and I read, I was born, of course, after the war, but I know what happens if we shut up, if we close our eyes when the injustice is small. It's getting bigger and bigger, and by the time we all want to shout and try to stop the injustice, it's already too late. And Israel tries all the time to say the lesson from the Holocaust is, look what happened to the Jews in Europe. But this is just a very small and unfortunately sometimes cynically used by politicians to gain power. The lesson is a humanitarian, is an international lesson. We have to speak out when we see injustice. And the sooner we start, when the injustice yes, Israel is not executing people, not building death camps, but nevertheless, what we see in the Jordan Valley and in South Hebron Hills is ethnical cleansing. We, in Combatants for Peace, we did not use this term until recently. When I joined like 5 years ago, Combatants for Peace, I heard and I spoke about occupation and of course the conflict. But what we see is that settlers are giving all the benefits, as much water as they want, as much land as they want, and the Palestinians are being pushed out of their territories. What you see in those pictures are all kinds of methods. It can be just picking up all the material, as you see in this picture from Hamam el-Mali from the 26th of January, where the homes were just taken apart, all the fences where they protect their sheep and goats at night with those fences so they will not run away or that they will not be attacked by animals. All these very, very simple facilities are just being taken or being put down to the ground. And as soon as they start building it, and this is something that we did not see before. In the past, when demolitions took place, the Palestinians would move 50 meters or 500 meters to any of the other direction. And then the demolitions would, the whole process of going to give them the warning and getting to the demolition would take sometimes months and sometimes even years. These past 2 weeks, we saw demolitions happening twice a day, even in Homsa. It was destroyed in the morning. In the afternoon, the Palestinian Authority brought new material for the shepherds to rebuild at least the fences and at least some simple shelter for the night. It's very cold now in the Jordan Valley at night, and the kids and the animals both need to be protected from the bitter cold. So in the afternoon, the Palestinian Authority brought material. The shepherds started rebuilding. In the evening, the army was there again. Just a few hours after they were there for the first time, at 10 o'clock at night, the army was gone and leaving for the second time in one day the community of Homsa. And in the next day, the Palestinians built again. So who am I to say I don't have the energy anymore to leave my comfortable home and go down to the Jordan Valley and do just a little bit to help them? And this is what you see in these pictures. This is what we try to do. But we cannot succeed, and I will finish with this sentence. We cannot succeed on our own. The international community is essential to how can I simply say, to put pressure on the Israeli government. Without the pressure of the Israeli government, as we saw in the other cases that were mentioned here, the chances that the violation, the very brutal violation against human rights of the occupied Palestinian population, there is a chance. Nobody can assure us that it will help. We are working against strong powers. The history of Europe in the 1940s is still very relevant here, and it's very relevant in Europe. And I totally understand why it's very difficult for Europeans, especially from Germany, to speak out freely in Germany against the Israeli government, because you're automatically getting you're being accused of being anti-Semitist, and it's not simple. But as I said, if we want to try to change the reality, the international voice is extremely, extremely important. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yair. The message is a difficult one, but the reality is even more difficult in the occupied territories. Just so that we're all on the same page, Area C is 61% of the West Bank. It's the area where most of the settlements are, and where Palestinians have virtually no possibility of building, and in fact are subject, as we've just heard, to expropriations of the land and demolitions and so on a daily basis. So I want to open this now to questions. I have one question from Eli. Eli Abidov is also a very active activist who spent day and night at Khan al-Ahmar. And Eli, do you want to ask your questions? I wanted to add to it a little bit, but go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away.
Thank you, and thanks everybody here. It's a Sisyphic work to do this activity with the Combatants for Peace. We've been doing it for years, and it's brave people that you see in the field that have been doing it for 20 years and don't stop. They don't have the privilege to stop. One activist told me, if I didn't do that, I'll have to leave Israel. And since it's so hard, it's great. It's very important to remember the success. And as Galia said, Khan al-Ahmar was one of our successes along these years. And as Yair said, now we need it. We feel, or I feel, and we feel that it's only the outside pressure that makes the difference. And there, the diplomats came to Khan al-Ahmar, and Merkel came to Israel, though she didn't come to Khan al-Ahmar. A letter was sent to our prime minister, pressing him for not touching, not moving, not demolishing the Khan al-Ahmar. And I wonder if we can, as you said, Sven, that you report to your to the sending states, and then there's the bilateral discussions. Can we have the same thing done for Homsa? That's on one hand. And the second question is, what about the war crimes? We are seeing here war crimes. This is an occupied area. Can the diplomatic community take a stand and be part of what is happening in Hague? That's my question.
I want to take one more question and then ask the two of you, Sven and Viktor, to answer. There's a question from Mona. Where are you? Mona, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? No? Okay.
Can you hear me?
No, speak up. We can't hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's
I
better.
don't have
Yeah.
a camera.
Okay, then Nico. There's a question from Aniko. I think that one of the couple of questions that sort of border on what Eli raised, and that's the issue of working with or getting the Americans more involved. I do remember a period before the Obama administration when the EU was working on a statement on Jerusalem, and they were under tremendous pressure from the Americans not to issue a statement. And in the end, I think the Americans won. So I think I would add to the question that Eli raised of having foreign governments take a stand on the issues here, specific issues here. I would like to add to that just how you can, or can you in any way get the Americans more involved, because there's also a better chance of the Israeli governments listening to the Americans. So I just add that, and then please send some more questions to the chat box and we'll get to those as well. Sven, do you want to tackle some of those questions, or Viktor?
Well, since I started, just fair for me to give the floor now to Viktor, and I pick up whatever is left then afterwards. Okay,
okay, Viktor, the ball is in your court.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, from my side, first of all, I really want to commend all the activists from Combatants for Peace that really do the hard work, the legwork in the field, really in the front lines. And of course, I've forgotten a very important part of what diplomats do in their daily lives, and that's just to listen what's happening. So in that sense, your accounts and your interventions are part of that. For us, important to understand what is really happening on the ground. I can fully relate to Osama's frustration in terms of the international community, but when I mentioned, my strategy in the morning to say this is not my conflict, I actually mean that, because it's like a psychologist or a psychiatrist that cannot be operational if he or she becomes too much involved with the case as such. So, but I can assure you, I'm a very empathic person. Otherwise, I wouldn't choose to be here. I wouldn't choose to work or take this posting. And I certainly wouldn't choose to move my whole family of 6 to live on the Mount of Olives and do the daily commute through the checkpoints to Ramallah. So yeah, listening, empathy is also part of our work and the qualities that we have. I guess that refers to all the diplomats that are present here on the ground. And I just visited Kalkilia last week, just to give an example, to also get a sense of the hardships that are being there, that form the daily lives of the people that live there. Yeah, on Kochav's intervention, yeah, also very, very emotional. I also commend your activism, keep it up. Yeah, to expose the realities, to expose the international community to the realities. Certainly COVID hasn't helped anyone to keep up the frequency of the delegation visits, that usually take place from administration, parliamentarians, media, business people, all walks of life, usually come and visit regularly the OPT, and then it's our role as diplomats exactly to expose those people to the realities, also to make the realities known in public. And this is a very powerful tool that we, of course, are engaged in the front lines. And maybe on Ellie's question on the war crimes, yeah, I mean, of course, the international community, all the contracting parties to the Rome Statute, of course, they have something at stake. Switzerland is certainly part of those countries that are strong supporters of the International Criminal Court and of international criminal justice. And Switzerland was certainly not one of the countries that would have filed a amicus curiae brief in that procedure to take a stance on the issue of the on the judiciability of the OPT situation. Yeah, I mean, that's it's a starting point now with this decision, and Switzerland, like many other countries, will remain supportive in the advancement of international justice, including in the OPT. And I may just recall, war crimes. Yeah, I mean, this decision by the ICC is not addressed against a country. It's addressed against individuals who may or may have not undertaken war crimes from the Palestinian and the Israeli side. So it looks at both sides of the equation. Also, Hamas will be asked to cooperate, obviously. So yeah, it will be interesting to see how that develops. So we follow up on that very closely. On getting the Americans involved, that's very obvious. That's very obvious, and a lot is happening behind the scenes already, to my knowledge, on engaging the Americans here more. And yeah, the hope is that with the new administration, some of the policies of the past can be reversed, and the equation can be somewhat the pendulum can swing back somewhat to be a bit more equitable to face the challenges of this context. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor. I have a question from Aniko. Where are you? Do you want to ask the question yourself? Aniko asked about have any of you diplomats submitted an official question to the Israeli government about the current demolitions and evacuations? And if so, what was the response you received from the Israeli government? Sven, do you know anything about any kind of official approach to the Israeli government about the current demolitions and evacuations and so forth?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, this is a super interesting and super exciting event for me. It is so broad that sometimes I fail. Sometimes I want to talk about, what can be done from a purely conceptual point of view, and then I have to think about, hey, what is the actual objective of this meeting? Meaning, what can diplomats do? So I'm torn apart, and the comments I received go in all directions. So I love that discussion. It's really great. But let me just quickly come back to what diplomats can do.
Absolutely.
And try to address some of the questions which have been raised in the chat, which I think are very challenging and very relevant. So and I have to say that both Viktor and I were probably the most active diplomats over the past 10 months or so, probably more than our predecessors. I personally have led, I think, 5 or 6 heads of mission visits to the occupied Palestinian territory. We took with us numerous media, Palestinian, regional, international, to an extent that never happened before, to the same extent. I was criticized by all kinds of lobbying groups about, being anti-Semitic myself, which is ridiculous because I love Israel. I love the Israeli people. I was always an admirer, but I also love the Palestinian people. And, for me, I took it from a purely human rights perspective. My measurement is, what are the yardsticks of international law? And I've served 4 times in my life as head of mission. I went to totalitarian countries like Cuba, to war countries like South Sudan, and sort of difficult countries like Mozambique. And in all places, I tried to uphold international law. And I will do exactly the same thing here in the West Bank in Gaza. And so my background as being German is in no way affected by that. I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm just trying to see whether international law is respected or not. Now that's the background. Now, what can diplomats do? And within the mandate we have, as Viktor said, and that's very useful for us, we need to understand the situation. That's the reason why we go there. That's the reason why we talk to people. That's the reason why we expose ourselves. B, we report on what we see to our headquarters. Very essential, because these guys are in Brussels, in Paris, in Washington. They're not here, but we are here. Even those who are in Tel Aviv don't even go over to the West Bank and go to Gaza, right? There's a complete disconnect between Israeli-based diplomats and those who are based in Jerusalem, Ramallah, because they know the reality on an everyday basis. So we report to headquarters and try to sensitize them. Thirdly, we demonstrate, and Khirbat al-Khumsa was a great example, solidarity. When I went on camera, I said, I'm here for 3 reasons: to demonstrate solidarity, to try to find ways and means of supporting the people, and I'm reporting back to headquarters what can be done. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. So we're trying to demonstrate solidarity and give hope. I'll give you one example. I was questioned by CNN, Simon Kiley, the other day. It was actually aired today on CNN. And he told me, listen, you guys, whatever, pay $650 million a year for Palestine. Aren't you the sidekick of the occupation? And I said, well, what? No, that's what he said. What is the alternative? What kind of hope can we give to the Palestinian project of self-determination and statehood? If we were to say, sorry, we withdraw, it's under international humanitarian law, the obligations of the occupying power to ensure that $1 billion per year flow to the Palestinians, fair enough, but it won't happen. Right? So in the meantime, while working on a 2-state solution, while trying to sort out the very complex issue of a negotiated process, which has been stalled for far too long, actually since 2009 probably, I much hope that with the new administration in Washington and possibly some more movement from the Arab states and the Europeans working together, we can reinstill some momentum in this one. While waiting for this, we need to keep up the hope of self-determination and statehood alive by doing what? Trying to contribute to a more democratic, a more accountable, a more legitimate Palestinian government. So elections are very important, but also the governance on economic files, on social files, on all other files is very important. Statehood needs to be very important. So also that keeping up that objective and dream of the Palestinian cause is very important. But also, when I say what diplomats can do, it's also important that we try to, how shall I say, engage others, right? Engaging a critical mass of foreign partners here. That's the reason why we go as a group. Now, the EU has the advantage of having sufficient convening power to bring diplomats from the EU and associated like-minded partners like Switzerland, Norway, UK, Canada, Australia along. Very much hope that the US will also be part of that group. It's very important that we have a like-minded group because that increases the chance. But one thing we cannot do, neither Viktor nor I nor anyone else, we cannot substitute for what you have been doing. You as activists, as academics, as a critical and informed public. That's not our role. And we cannot, as Viktor said, imply punitive measures. Sanctions, if they were to be applied, have to come from headquarters. So that's way above our pay scale. We've got to be realistic about that. So the 3 things or 4 things we can do, I try to enumerate. But let me come to a couple of questions here, which I think are important to address. And they are more of a conceptual nature than anything else. But maybe I saw in the chat that Catherine Hugh Freitag asked me about the EU guidelines on human rights defenders, concretely, right? So in my previous posting, South Sudan, Mozambique, and also Cuba, people came to my office and said, Sven, I'm persecuted by the security services of these given countries. What can you do for me? And we have the human rights defender mechanism whereby we can actually pay for legal services. We can even help a given person in danger of being persecuted or fearing for his or her life, of being transferred to another country. We can cover this to a certain extent. So this is a human rights defender mechanism which can be mobilized within a nick of time. That's a possibility. Another thing we do is, of course, as I said, showing solidarity, demonstrating to people who are human rights activists and who are in danger of being persecuted or being sort of tried, like Isa Amro, that we show up at their trials. We create a critical mass of support. The most important thing, I've seen this in Cuba in particular, is that you show solidarity. The more solidarity you show and you make it an internationally visible event, the easier it will be for them to feel safe. We don't have enough time to give examples, but I have numerous examples in my professional life where we did that. Catherine, feel rest assured, we do this, and if human rights defenders come to our office, we will help them. I think there's an important question of Herzl Legev, and he said, can you really apply laws in a situation where Palestinian statehood is a matter of contention? I'm paraphrasing a little bit his question. And then Israel, the application of international law. Well, there was a very important movement, international law, which became a customary international law, the duty to protect. This was basically an international consensus which came out after the terrible incidents and the terrible developments in Rwanda, where within a few months, 800,000 Tutsis were murdered. And as a result of which, 10 years later, the international community basically established that figure of the duty to protect, meaning that international partners, other countries, have the obligation to intervene when crimes against humanity are at stake. And that is also the reason why in the Fourth Geneva Convention, which Viktor referred to, the articles referring to third-party obligations are relevant. Parties being signatory to the obligation have to ensure that international humanitarian law, i.e. protecting the well-being of the population under occupation, be respected. And we have to take measures in order to ensure that. So we have an obligation under international law to intervene, also before Israel as the occupying power, to ensure respect and compliance. This is very important for people to understand when you hear these sort of disputes, what is actually your role there? Do you intervene? No, we have an obligation as EU, as Switzerland, as US to intervene because we are a signatory party to the international convention of the Fourth Geneva Convention. So I think that's important for Herzl Legev, I think, to hear that kind of important legal figure. Yes, I'd like to address 2 questions or 2 comments. Mona Galek, I don't know whether I pronounced this well, I didn't see it properly, and also Kochav and Osama. Whenever I talk to Israeli and Palestinian friends about this, you know, I've been here only for a year, but I've had a long diplomatic career behind me. When I look at a scenario, at a conflict like this one, I ask myself the question, what is the perspective for tomorrow? So what we observed since 67 and since 94 Oslo, a creeping annexation. Today, every ninth Israeli is actually a settler in occupied territory. And this is the process of the past, 50 years. So if this continues, what is the prospect for any kind of self-determination and statehood? But now I ask two questions. And the first question is, if you look at demographic pressure, you see that the Palestinian population grows much faster than the Israeli population, despite the ultra-Orthodox. If you take it on average, much quicker. So in 20, 30, 40 years, you're going to have far more Arabs and Palestinians living in Greater Palestine than today. And this is particularly worrying in Gaza, where you have a very confined space. Today, you have the highest per capita already per square meter in the world in Gaza. Imagine 20, 30 years down the line. And the second is climate change. How do you address access to natural resources, to water, to energy, to land, and to feed an ever-growing population unless you provide the means for that? Now, I ask my Israeli friends, what is the option? What are the objectives? You have creeping annexation, you don't address the long-term trends, or what does it lead to? And you have three options here. One option is you got basically an apartheid state, where basically you have 2 rules or 3 rules for different people depending on their ethnic background. Is that the option Israel wants to continue? Is that in conformity with the constitution and the basic law? Big question. Secondly, the other option would be you have one state with equal rights. And then many Israelis were to say, well, that would undermine the Jewish character. And in 20, 30 years down the line, this would not be a Jewish state anymore. As a matter of fact, it would be a dominated state by Arabs and Palestinians and different, and possibly a Muslim majority. So the only way out of that dilemma would be a two-state solution. And I think we need to be very clear with Israel that that is the only way forward. Either you accept it or you don't, but then you have to accept also a one-state reality, either apartheid or equal rights to all. And that should be very clear. And that's, I think, the task of activists, of analysts, of academics, of think tankers to make this clear. And one thing which I find interesting to note, and it's a bit of sad as well. If you look at the public opinion in Israel, and Kochav and Yair, they are the big exception. They live in a relatively privileged environment, but they take the incredible leap of going to the occupied territories and help these people. But this is the minority, a really rare minority. And I could add everybody here is on the call. Because if you go to the people in Haifa and Tel Aviv, they could care less about that. And when you see right now the electoral campaign in Israel, nobody talks about the Palestinian question. That does not bring home a new government. That's a sad story. The Palestinian conflict is not an argument for forming a new government. Quite the contrary, as a matter of fact. So public opinion, media. If you look Haaretz, you think you live in a different world. Read the other newspapers and nobody covers these things, right? So in a way, public opinion in Israel is not supporting what you all want and what we all want. And that's a big problem. And I think that's the reason why, we as diplomats can only do so much. We are engaged, we are committed, we are determined. We represent governments who say the right thing, who may not do or walk the talk. I agree with that. But even that, dear friends, depends on public opinion. That's the reason why I think Yair is completely right. The more public opinion exists in Washington, in Berlin, in Paris, and in Tel Aviv regarding the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and the intractability, unless one finds a solution which is not leading into apartheid state or into a one-state solution, then, but only then, people can possibly be held accountable. Let me stop here by that, but I think this is close to my heart, and I really want to see that people like yourselves take this up and try to even, explore avenues where these critical mass of public opinion, which is necessary, can be realized. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sven. The truth is, you raised a number of points, and of course, there's quite a debate going on now about the two-state solution. Is it too late? The one-state option, because I don't happen to personally think that's a solution, but the option. And certainly, these are questions that we've been looking at. And public opinion, as you said, especially as we go into our new election, where many pundits believe that the results will be no different from the previous elections, and we've had quite a few of those in the past few years. But I think one of the points of civil society, peace organizations like Combatants for Peace, is to try to change public opinion and try to demonstrate that, if you can see our slogan, that there is another way. There is another way. It doesn't have to be this way. And by working together to try to demonstrate to both societies that there is indeed another way. But our issue here, and I think it's the reason that we have been looking to this discussion with the diplomats, is that one of the major issues that we face and frustrations is accountability. The sense that there is no international accountability or responsibility to protect, which you mentioned, when it comes to Israel and the Palestinians. I think that this, when we look to the international community, which we see as a source of help for us, not to do the job for us, but to help us in our job, what we want to see is when you take this message and you bring it to your governments and hopefully to your publics in Europe, there will be a demand for accountability. And once we begin to have that, which we haven't had, there's no responsibility to protect when it comes to Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There simply isn't. And I see there's one person on this Zoom who's actually researched that topic. There has not been accountability. We know what's in the Fourth Geneva Convention. We know what international law is. We know from people like Yair and Kochav and Osama. We see it every day in our activists who are out there. We know what is going on. But this has to be known to the Israeli public, which we try to convey. It has to be known outside. There has to be, at least our feeling is that there has to be accountability. Because what Yair has pointed out, and I think that you as diplomats here know this, we have been engaged in creeping, that is, the Israeli government has been engaged in creeping annexation for a long time, and it's no longer creeping. It's no longer creeping. Yair showed the demolitions that take place twice a day, 3 times a day. We never called this ethnic cleansing, but we have reached a point where maybe the quantitative is now led to a qualitative change. What is going on cannot continue. And that's the message that we're hoping that you will get out, because our sense is that when you come with your gestures of solidarity and the information that you send back, you are helping us. You're helping us in our struggle to bring an end to the occupation and an end to this situation. I think that we have sort of gone for quite some time. I really just want to thank you. And I know that this appearance is not something that diplomats do every day. I'm not sure that you were allowed to do it. I can only thank you for agreeing to do it, but also to tell you how much we do appreciate what you are doing and how much we feel we need you to continue. And I must say, we have to demand of you to do even more, even though I know that this is a lot to demand. We do what we can. And if there's any way that we can help you to engage with us, we of course would welcome that. So once again, I want to thank you. I also want to thank everybody who's participated. I know we didn't get to all of your questions, and I want to thank Grégoire, who works with Combatants for Peace as a volunteer, and all his help in setting up this meeting tonight. And I hope we can continue to be in touch. You have our Facebook, we have a website. Be in touch with us. If you aren't a supporter, we'd like you to become supporters, especially the people.
Gadi, do we have time for another question?
If you, it depends what it is, because it's gotten pretty late.
I want 1 minute just to say thank you. Can I?
Okay, go ahead. Yes, Osama, absolutely.
Yeah, Kochav, you asked first, yalla. So people don't call me anti-Semitic because I took.
Osama, there is no way in the world I would call you an anti-Semite.
Anti-Semitism, it's not just against Jewish people. Let's not forget that. Anti-Semitism.
I'm Semitic more than the
people.
Kochav, do you have a question, Kochav?
Yes, I had a question to Mr. Sven. I wanted to ask that many times we see at the demolitions that the demolitions and the confiscate of property is actually things that came from the European Union as a humanitarian support for Palestinians. So they're basically stealing your money.
Right.
Well, if we won't joke about it, we will cry about it. But I was wondering, why would you, I mean, not do something in order to tell Israel, at least do not touch humanitarian aid?
And I would add to that, do you get complaints? Yes, but do you get complaints at home? Where's our money going? Yes, please do. I give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, that is, and I didn't reply to the question what we actually are doing. And sorry, I didn't actually reply to that question that was on the chat as well. Of course we engage. I personally spoke to the leadership of Kogat. We are in good relations with them. We try to find pragmatic solutions to the lack of adoption of master plans. Only 5% of all master plans presented by the Palestinian authorities and communities have been accepted by the Israeli administration in the occupied territory. We're trying to work with them that much more will be approved, and also socioeconomic infrastructure we finance will not be destroyed. So we started this as of recent, about like a few months ago, and I hope that this will continue to have some positive effect. Of course, it's fully unacceptable that humanitarian aid is being demolished, confiscated, etc., and no avail. So we intervene both through my office before Kogat in Beit El and in Tel Aviv, through our embassies of the EU in Tel Aviv, before the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, through our capitals in Brussels and elsewhere in Europe, with our and their Israeli counterparts. So we have a range of diplomatic engagement. So far to limited extent. But I'm trustful and hopeful that at least the relation with Kogat will improve to the extent that we can improve the plight of the situations of the people living in the West Bank, in particular in Area C. So that's what we're doing, and of course, we will try our best.
Thank you for your answer. I appreciate it, and I appreciate your time. There is so much more that haven't been said, but I know we are already out of time, but thank you for that.
Victor, did you want to say a few words before we bring this to a close?
Osama wanted.
Osama did.
Osama
Victor?
first.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. So I just have a few comments here. First of all, thank you for being open and accept our talk and our maybe anger of the situation, because we are living there, we are living here, and you are not only ambassadors or EU people or diplomat people, you are messengers for humanity and for human rights, and it's your duty to hear us and to try to help us, because as you said, you are selling hope, and we opened our hearts and our hands for this hope. We carried the olive branch since 1994, and this olive branch is very disappointed and it will fall soon. We are not victims. I want to say this, I'm not talking to you as a victim. I'm a human being. I know how to fight to my rights, but I'm trying my best to follow the international rules, the international community rules about peaceful resistance. That's why we are asking you, begging you to stop the crimes of Israel before it's too late. And I'm not asking something impossible. I'm asking freedom. That's all. I'm asking enough water, freedom of movement. And you was talking to your Israeli friends and telling them if it's one state, because of the settlers, it will be an apartheid. It is already an apartheid state. It is already an apartheid state. As you mentioned also, you love Israel and you don't want Israel. We don't hate Israel. No one hates anyone. We don't hate Jewish people. Occupation has nothing to do with Judaism, and being against it has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. And my last question is, are we the Palestinians paying the price of the Holocaust? That's the main question. That's why Israel is above the international law. Thank you so much.
Victor, I want to
I
give
also
you.
want to thank, excuse me, Galia, I also want to thank Sven and
Of course,
Mr.
Israel is
Vavricka. And I hope that there will be another chance to talk to you and think of ways to expand the difficult situation for you to support and help us move forward. Thank you very much for being here.
Yes, I think we might try to arrange some meetings like that. Victor, I still want to give you the possibility of a last word if you want to add anything.
No, just from my side, thank you for the opportunity to interact with you. I can just invite you to stay in touch with us. We also have a Facebook page, the Swiss Rep office in Ramallah. Feel free to join us and to remain in touch and to keep up the dialogue. We're always open to hear voices. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You could be certain that we will do that, Sven and Victor. Again, I want to thank you very much on behalf of Combatants for Peace. And Yair and Kochav and Osama, thanks for being with us and adding some voice from on the ground, which I can't do because of COVID and my age. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight and this afternoon for those of you who are abroad. We'll be in touch. And hope
Thank
to
you
have
for everybody who joined.
so
And just remember that criticism against the Israeli government is never, never anti-Semitism. Thank you.
Bye-bye,
Ya'tikum
everybody.
al-afiyah.
Bye-bye.
Shukran.
Bye. Osama, take care of
My
yourself.
question wasn't answered, but I know the answer already by you.
Okay, bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.